the lack of effort by our leaders to do anything about that, which continues to horrify us, which today is the latest awful news. 2 mass shootings in this country, about 13 hours apart. First on Saturday, a massacre in El Paso, Texas. A 21-year-old gunman, terrorist, opened fire at a Walmart, killing at least 20 people and injuring at least 26. That suspect is in custody, and the FBI has opened a domestic terrorism investigation, according to a source familiar with the investigation. Authorities are investigating a document posted online and believed to have been written by the suspected terrorist. The document is filled with white nationalist language and racist hatred towards immigrants and specifically towards Latinos. And then, as if that weren't horrifying enough, shortly after 1 a.m. on Sunday morning, a gunman opened fire outdoors in a Dayton, Ohio business and entertainment district, killing at least 9 innocent people and injuring 26. That gunman wore body armor and fired what's called a long gun and was killed by police less than a minute after the shooting started, authorities say. Moments ago, President Trump tweeted out prayers for the people of El Paso and the people of Dayton. Yesterday, he called the El Paso shooting, quote, an act of cowardice. This morning, lawmakers and presidential candidates already are beginning to call for change. We're going to talk with at least 4 presidential candidates today about what they would do to stop this epidemic of mass shootings and shootings. We should note that we invited the Republican governor, lieutenant governor, and both Republican U.S. senators representing Texas to join us this morning. They all declined. The Republican governor of Ohio also declined. We also asked the White House to provide someone to discuss these shootings. That request, too, was declined. Joining me now, former Congressman from El Paso and 2020 Democratic presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke. Congressman O'Rourke, thank you for joining us on this horrible day for your community. Our thoughts and prayers is such a cliche at this point, but we're all feeling the pain of what's going on in El Paso and in Dayton. Have you learned anything new about what happened since you got back to El Paso yesterday?
Thank you, Jake. We're grieving right now for our fellow El Pasoans, and this community is also thinking about Dayton and the people there who have suffered such extraordinary loss. Came back yesterday and got to spend some time with some of the victims and their families. I'm seeing extraordinarily courageous people who have suffered the most grievous wounds and who have also learned that it wasn't just one family member, it was 2 or 3 or more who were shot, and in some cases who were killed. This community is coming together unlike any other time that I can remember. Donations of blood, donations of food, just the love and the encouragement and the strength and the support in the face of a horrific mass killing. You know, El Paso will see on average 18 murders a year. That's the average over the last 10 years. We lost at least 20 people yesterday, and it took someone coming from outside of this community of immigrants to come and bring their hatred and their death to El Paso. And in the face of that, this community has shown just incredible strength and love and is more than a match for this. We will overcome this. But something has to change. And one of the wives of one of the victims, he had been selling things to raise money for the soccer team he coaches, shot in the chest. His wife asked me, why is this happening in our country right now? Why will this continue to happen? How do we change this? And Jake, I've got to tell you, in addition to universal background checks, in addition to ending the sales of weapons of war into our communities, in addition to red flag laws, we've got to acknowledge the hatred, the open racism that we're seeing. There's an environment of it in the United States. We see it on Fox News, we see it on the internet, but we also see it from our commander-in-chief. And he is encouraging this. He doesn't just tolerate it, he encourages it. Calling Mexican immigrants rapists and criminals, warning of an invasion at our border, seeking to ban all people of one religion. Folks are responding to this. It doesn't just offend us, it encourages the kind of violence that we're seeing, including in my hometown of El Paso yesterday.
So I want to talk about that in a second, but I do want to show this picture of you visiting with a victim named Rosemary, who you said was shot in the chest, but she is doing well after surgery. Obviously, we want to bring as much attention to the victims of this as much as possible. So I do want to talk about how we can stop it in 1 second, but if you could tell me about that moment meeting Rosemary?
You know, I'd met her son on the flight back from Las Vegas. He approached me on the airplane, told me that he'd just learned that his mother had been shot in the chest. His grandmother had been shot in the stomach. His great aunt had also been shot. He was flying back to El Paso, and he asked if I would join him by going to University Medical Center, where I met Rosemary. Both of her lungs punctured, her lungs being drained as I was talking to her. Big smile on her face, just extraordinary courage. Not only was she shot, but her mom, her aunt was also shot, her family around her. These extraordinary caregivers at University Medical Center, nurses who had been working 12, 14 hours already, doctors who'd been seeing multiple patients with multiple gunshot wounds, just really moved me and makes me so incredibly proud of Rosemary, her family, families all across El Paso right now who should never have to demonstrate this kind of courage and yet nonetheless are doing so. Met families who have not heard from a family member and fear the worst, have called Del Sol Medical Center, have called UMC, don't know where their mom or dad are, fear that they are one of the at least 20 who are dead already, and are resolved to ensure that this changes. And I heard that from so many people yesterday. They want this to change. This cannot be the normal for the United States of America. And I know this community is going to do everything within our power to make sure that it is not.
So, Congressman, you wrote on Twitter and said publicly in El Paso, President Trump's racism does not just offend our sensibilities, it fundamentally changes the character of this country and it leads to violence. Now, the document that this terrorist in El Paso, that law enforcement is investigating whether or not he actually posted this document, which refers to Latinos coming to the country as an invasion, which, as you noted, is language that we've heard from the President of the United States. It also says, and I know, it's hard to make sense of any of this stuff, but it also says that he had this ideology before President Trump. He kind of anticipated, assuming this document's real, the alleged terrorist anticipated that people would blame President Trump for it and said, I felt this way before President Trump.
I don't know the point that you're trying to make here, Jake, but it's pretty obvious to me and anyone who's listened to the president and will look at the facts that his anti-immigrant rhetoric, not just the things that I cited, but calling asylum seekers animals or an infestation. Now, you might describe a cockroach or termites as an infestation, something less than human. You might hear someone in the Third Reich describe a given people based on their characteristic as an infestation or subhuman. But that's what the President of the United States is doing right now. And it's not just with Mexican immigrants, conflating Congresswoman Ilhan Omar with the terrorists from 9/11, encouraging that chanting in North Carolina of send her back. Let's not mince words right now. This president is encouraging greater racism and not just the racist rhetoric, but the violence that so often follows. This shooter in the manifesto cites in part for his inspiration the shooter in Christchurch, New Zealand, who cites Donald Trump as his inspiration. This anti-immigrant rhetoric, and again, it is not just President Trump, but he's certainly, as the person in the position of greatest public trust and power, most responsible for it. This is Fox News. This is what we're seeing on the internet. This is the toleration of intolerance and hatred and racism in this country. This is what is causing what we are seeing here today, and it will continue to happen unless we call it out and unless we change it.
The FBI Director, Christopher Wray, has warned Congress about the increasing threat of white supremacy in the past. I want you to take a listen to something that FBI Director Wray said in April of this year.
We've seen an increase in the reporting of hate crimes, and the FBI's own number of hate crime cases have increased. The danger, I think, of white supremacist violent extremism or any other kind of violent extremism is, of course, significant. We assess that it's a persistent, pervasive threat.
If the kinds of shootings we've seen in El Paso or in California, in which the individual there was suspected to have white supremacist ideology, and other white supremacist murders, the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, and on and on. If those were Muslim men committing those crimes, how do you think Congress would be reacting as opposed to the fact that it is white supremacists committing these crimes?
They weren't Muslim men committing those crimes.
I know.
I don't know how Congress...
My point is there not a double standard
what
here?
The problem is. That's
what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying, yeah.
Well, yeah, but let's focus on the problem that the FBI director has called out to members of Congress and to this country. We have a problem with white nationalist terrorism in the United States of America today. So I don't want to confuse people about what is going on or use a hypothetical about what if this was somebody else from a different background or profile. These are white men motivated by the kind of fear that this president traffics in. You know, the mosque in Victoria, Texas was burned to the ground on the same day that President Trump signed his order attempting to ban Muslim travel to the United States of America, when he says after Charlottesville that Klansmen and white supremacists and neo-Nazis are very fine people. The commander-in-chief is sending a very public signal to the rest of this country about what is permissible and, in fact, even what he encourages to happen. So let's connect the dots here on what is happening and why it is happening and who is responsible for this right now, and the fact that it's going to take all of us, Republicans, Democrats, independents alike, rising up, standing up to be counted against what this president is doing, against this white nationalist racism, against this violence, and getting this country back. They are saying that our differences are, in fact, dangerous. If you're a Muslim, you're inherently dangerous. If you are an immigrant, you are inherently dangerous. If you are an asylum seeker, you are invading this country. You are an infestation. Those words have very real consequences. You don't get mass shootings like these. You don't torch mosques. You don't put kids in cages until you have a president who's given people permission to do that. And that's exactly what's happening in the United States of America today.
Just to be clear, I'm not trying to confuse anybody. I was trying to point out that there seems a glaring double standard in how law enforcement and Congress talks about these incidents. These are white supremacist terrorist acts over and over and over in which people are being murdered. And I was trying to offer a hypothetical. If it were a different group, I feel like it would be a red alarm, fire, a 4-alarm fire. But let me move on, because during one of the debates, your 2020 opponent, Governor Jay Inslee of Washington, said that President Trump is a, quote, white nationalist. That was a fairly stark accusation. Do you agree with that? Do you think President Trump is a white nationalist? Yes,
I do. And again, from some of the record that I just recited to you, the things that he has said, both as a candidate and then as the President of the United States, this cannot be open for debate. And you, as well as I, have a responsibility to call that out, to make sure that the American people understand what is being done in their name by the person who holds the highest position of public trust in this land. He does not even pretend to respect our differences or to understand that we are all created equal. He is saying that some people are inherently defective or dangerous, reminiscent of something that you might hear in the Third Reich, not something that you expect in the United States of America, based on their religion, based on their sexual orientation, based on their immigration status, based on the countries that they come from, calling those in Africa shithole nations, and saying that he'd like to have more immigration from Nordic countries, the whitest place on planet Earth today. So again, let's be very clear about what is causing this and who the president is. He is an open, avowed racist and is encouraging more racism in this country. And this is incredibly dangerous for the United States of America right now. All of us have a responsibility to stand up and be counted on this issue.
You went home to El Paso yesterday after the shooting to spend some time with your wife and your children. There are a lot of parents across the country right now trying to talk to their kids about this, or even debating whether or not they should tell their kids about it. What did you tell your kids about what happened in El Paso?
I was laying down with my youngest, Henry, who is 8 years old, and he was asking me question after question after question about why this is happening. For him, and really frankly for me, it is so hard to believe that this happened in El Paso. It's one of the safest places in America, and safe in large part because of our differences. A quarter of those with whom we live were born somewhere else, chose this country, made us better by their presence. Why is this happening here? Why would somebody come to our community? I don't know how he got here, but it's a 10, 11, 12-hour drive to come here in order to do this. Some of this I've explained to you in terms of what our president has done, in terms of this environment of racism in this country. Really hard, though, for a child to understand why anyone would do this to anyone else. But my responsibility, your responsibility, is to make this better for Henry and for the generations that follow ours. They need to know that we knew exactly what was happening, and in the face of that, we stood up and did the right thing. And I'm 100% focused on doing that right now.
All right, former Congressman Beto O'Rourke from his home city of El Paso, a city that is grieving today. Good luck to you and your fellow citizens. It is a horrible day, and we're all thinking about you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jake.
We're learning more about the deadly shooting in Dayton, Ohio as well. That shooter targeted people outdoors in a downtown entertainment district. Dayton's mayor said that the shooter killed 9 people and injured 26 in less than a minute using an AR-15 style rifle with a high-capacity magazine. Joining me now is Ohio's Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown. Senator Brown, thanks so much for joining us on this horrible day. Obviously, all of us watching are offering our deepest condolences to everyone in Dayton and in the state of Ohio. The shooting happened just 13 hours after the horrific massacre, the terrorist attack really, in El Paso. What was your reaction when you heard the news of what was going on in your home state?
Well, of course, sadness, but also anger, because I spoke to the mayor earlier this morning, Mayor Whaley, who's mayor of that great Ohio city, and she said she has gotten literally dozens and dozens of texts and emails from mayors around the country offering condolences but advice, because they have seen this in their cities, city after city after city. And the response I had, in addition to sadness, is anger that Congress still doesn't do its job. The House of Representatives has passed background check legislation. The Senate could meet tomorrow. I hope that Senator McConnell would bring the Senate back tomorrow and pass the background check bill and send it to the president. The president must sign it, period.
The mayor of Dayton had an emotional reaction at a press conference earlier this morning describing how she felt having her city join that long list of places in America to experience a mass shooting. Just this year, having it so close to home must make it even worse. I mean, I know you've been trying to stop mass shootings, but tell us about what it's like for people you know to be involved.
I mean, I know Dayton very well. I've been in the Oregon district 40 or 50 times probably in my life, and it's just hard to understand why this happens and how this happens, and it's particularly hard to understand why our government continues to let it happen. I was part of the bill many years ago to ban assault weapons in this country. It passed. It passed with a good vote. It was the law for a number of years. President Bush II supported it, but because of the NRA, Congress did not renew the assault weapon ban, and it worked. The assault weapon ban was working. The fact that this many people were killed and injured, you reported in less than a minute. The mayor told me it was less than 30 seconds from the first shot until the police arrived and killed the shooter. And she said to me, hundreds could have died if the police response hadn't been that quick. That's the only good news in this, how great the police response was. But the fact that he had a weapon that could have, an assault weapon that could have shot, that could have killed so many people with enough bullets, enough magazines to mow down virtually anybody along that street and in those clubs and in those buildings, just tells me that Congress has just got to act and say no to the gun lobby for the first time and Mitch McConnell's life as the leader of the Senate.
We have some indication as to what motivated the alleged terrorist shooter in El Paso. Do you have any information you can share with us about the identity or the motive of the Dayton shooter?
Only that the mayor said it was a young white male. I believe she may have said his age, I believe early 20s, but I don't know for sure. He came not from the city of Dayton, he came from a town in Montgomery County nearby. That's the county Dayton's in. And that's all that I know. I assume the police already know a good bit more than that. Connie and I are on our way to Dayton soon after this interview is completed. We've left our home in Cleveland early this morning. We're heading south and going to Dayton, and we'll be there sometime this afternoon.
Is there any reason to believe that there's any connection whatsoever between what happened in El Paso and what happened in Dayton, either a copycat or a similar white supremacist ideology? Is there any indication as of now?
I have no way of knowing that. I just would ask, I would just hope the president would begin to try to, would stop the divisive, racist rhetoric that he has employed increasingly. He did it in the campaign in 2016. Many thought that would be enough to keep him from winning, but more importantly, he does it even more now. And I just remember what Barack Obama did after Sandy Hook and what Barack Obama did after Charleston. He went there. His job was to heal the country and to comfort people, the victims and families, and comfort the whole country and to heal the country. And I go back to President Bush, the second President Bush after 9/11. He went to a mosque and he said, Muslims didn't attack our country, terrorists did. And I wish the President of the United States would show the leadership of either of his predecessors and stop the racist, divisive talk and start the healing process.
Some of the Democrats running for president not only are faulting the president for his rhetoric, but they're saying that rhetoric, in their view, you heard Congressman Beto O'Rourke maybe, leads to this, causes violence. Do you agree, or does that go too far?
I don't know. I can't prove anything, but I do know that we've had two presidents, the two preceding presidents who dealt with terrible terrorism and mass shootings, tried to heal, and this president doesn't. I know that white supremacists feel empowered with this president. I know that. It's clear they feel empowered when he attacks people, and I saw the chants coming out of the crowd in I think, North Carolina, to send them back. And it just breaks my heart because we've never had, our country is better than this. Our country is just better than this kind of divisive, racist talk by a president of the United States. And I'm just always praying and hoping for something better. I guess the thoughts and prayers that my colleagues that always stand with the NRA, I hope their thoughts and prayers will go for the president to begin to heal and stop the racist, divisive talk. And I would hope some of my colleagues would, one, stand up to the gun lobby, and second, would actually talk to the president about doing better about all this.
You noted that the U.S. Senate, which time and again from Sandy Hook to Parkland has failed to take any action to try to make sure that guns do not get into the hands of people who would use them against innocent people. Right now, there is a bipartisan background check bill that the House passed in February, as you noted. It's waiting to be taken up by your chamber. Do you have any confidence that Majority Leader McConnell will even allow a vote on it?
I know the power of the NRA. I've had a lifetime F from the NRA in my political career. I know that they've spent a lot of money against me. I know they attack politicians like me, and I know that my Republican colleagues that are supported by the NRA know that. And I don't know that they lack courage, but they certainly have shown no sign of standing up to the gun lobby. And I don't know what to say to that question about what the chances are. I just hope that public officials will do their job, and their job is to stand with the American people and stand up for public health and public safety in a better society. And as I said, I will say again how important it is that Mitch McConnell call the Senate back on Monday. We could pass the background check bill in an afternoon, and people could get back on a plane and go back to their homes and their children and grandchildren and whatever else they're doing in August in the evening. We could do it that fast, and we'd do a resounding vote, and the President of the United States perhaps would feel compelled to sign the bill.
There are more than 20 people running for president in your party, the Democratic Party, right now. Many of them have proposed far more sweeping gun legislation beyond universal background checks, everything from gun licensing from Senator Cory Booker to gun buybacks. Now, you're from what is now a red state. You've been in the Senate since 2007. Do you think your party should focus more on gun proposals that can get through the Senate as opposed to more far-reaching plans? What are your views on that?
Well, I want to do something in response to this awful series of attacks on on citizens, defenseless citizens, and you start with the background check bill tomorrow, and then Congress gets serious about the assault weapon ban, which Congress has passed in the past with bipartisan support. A number of Republicans supported it. President Bush supported it. I believe he never signed it. To be clear, President Clinton signed it, but President Bush tried to get it through the Congress to renew it when it expired. So there have been prominent Republicans that support this. Those are two things we could do. We could do quickly, and I don't know what's next after that. We know that both of those work, and we know that in my state, the gun lobby is every bit as powerful with the governor and with the state legislature as it is in Washington, and I pray that my state will respond and do the right thing here too.
Senator Sherrod Brown, Democrat of Ohio, it's always good to see you, sir. Sorry it's under these circumstances. Good luck in Dayton today.
Thank you, Jake.
Coming up, much more in our breaking news coverage of these two deadly mass shootings. Next up, we're going to talk with presidential candidate Mayor Pete Buttigieg and his plan to combat gun violence and white nationalism. Stay with us. Welcome back to State of the Union on this horrible, grief-stricken Sunday. I'm Jake Tapper. We're following breaking news out of El Paso, Texas, and out of Dayton, Ohio. Dozens have been killed in two separate mass shootings. Joining me now to respond to this horrible news, 2020 presidential candidate, South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Mayor Buttigieg, thanks for joining us on this rough day. These two shootings, El Paso, Dayton, they're some of the deadliest mass shootings in our country's history. Between them, they've left at least 29 innocent people dead, 42 injured in a 13-hour span. Do you think this is actually going to spur lawmakers into action?
Well, every time this happens, we say never again. We say we're going to do something. We say it's going to change, and it hasn't. I've been thinking a lot about the fact that this same debate and this same cycle has been going on my entire adult life, and I'm wondering what it will take to get the sense of urgency, to get Washington to actually respond, especially when Americans, frankly, in both parties, want to see changes, at least some basic common sense measures on gun safety. Not to mention the need to stand up to white nationalist terrorism. And we got to call that what it is if we're going to fight it. I wonder what it will take to deliver the sense of urgency. After Sandy Hook, we said surely after this. And time again, this has happened. At the end of the day, without political change, I don't know that we'll get the solutions we need. But if this doesn't do it, I don't know what will.
You have a personal connection to the mall where the massacre in El Paso took place. What was your emotional reaction when you first heard the news of that shooting?
When I heard the word Cielo Vista, I thought about being a teenager, being excited that my grandma was going to take me to the mall because we used to visit every summer. And I just think of it as Americans should be able to think of shopping malls as either a place to go grab something or a place that teenagers look forward to going to. And instead, it's a place where Americans were murdered in a terrorist attack. And it's happening all over. I mean, to go from El Paso to Dayton in a matter of hours, and meanwhile to continue to deal with the fact that we lose so many lives one at a time to gun violence on a daily basis around the country, including in my hometown. We cannot continue accepting the unacceptable as if nothing could be done. We are the only country in the developed world where this happens routinely, and we rub our hands as though there was some cosmic force. This is the consequence of policy failures. It's time to act.
There's still so much we don't know about both of these shootings. Your gun safety plan calls for a variety of measures, from banning military-style semi-automatic rifles to establishing a nationwide gun licensing system. I know I don't have to list for you the mass casualty atrocities that have led Democrats to push time and time again for legislation far less sweeping than what you're proposing. Just closing the gun show loophole, for example, legislation that every time fails. Is there a proposal you have to end these mass shootings, or at least curtail them, that you think could get through the U.S. Senate?
Here's the thing. In America, things are impossible until they happen. And time again, to talk of something hopeful, we have seen policy breakthroughs around issue after issue in this country. It's time for gun safety to be that issue where the impossible became possible. And by the way, how can it be impossible, at least to deliver something like universal background checks, 90% of Americans, most Republicans, most gun owners want to see happen? Either this Senate needs to respond to the American people, or this Senate needs to be replaced, not to mention the need for a president who will actually do something about gun safety in this country and do something about standing up to white nationalist terror.
I can just tell you, as a journalist, I have literally, I've literally been covering the debate over closing the gun show loophole since you were in high school. I mean, I remember covering it in 1999 and interviewing Senator John McCain when he said he was going to support closing the gun show loophole, and even that couldn't get through the U.S. Senate. There's a tweet out there, I forget who wrote it, that says something along the lines of, the moment that this country decided that it was acceptable for 20 first and second graders to be massacred at Sandy Hook was the moment this country decided that it was not going to do gun control no matter what.
Look, at the beginning of this decade, it was considered preposterous that somebody like me could be married by the end of this decade, at least in my state of Indiana. We have to believe in the possibility of political change, but we also have to hold our leaders accountable when they fail to deliver it. And this isn't just a policy issue. This is a cultural issue. This is a question of how we handle responsible gun ownership. Here's something to think about this Sunday morning. Is a gun a tool or is it an idol? Anytime I've carried or handled a weapon, whether it was in Afghanistan for self-defense or whether it was to go skeet shooting or hunting, I viewed it as a tool. But if the gun corporation lobby, which is what the NRA is, now has people viewing guns as a thing to be loved, a thing to be protected, a thing that is a source of our freedom and power, and a thing to which we are willing to sacrifice human life. Isn't that the definition of a false god? We've got to change our thinking. We can absolutely honor Second Amendment rights for responsible gun owners without shooting down even the most basic common sense measures to save American lives, including our children. Or we can fail yet again. The choice is right in front of us. And the question is whether we're serious about this or not. We can't go on like this. I was part of what I feel like was the first generation where school shootings were routine. Now we've seen a second. Are we really going to allow there to be a third, or are we going to be proud of what we've done by 5, 10 years from now? On the current track we're on, we already have more guns than people in this country. But they're saying by 2030, there'll be 130 million more guns on the street. We could tell our kids by 2030 that we finally changed. Or we could let it be one of those issues that we just accept the unacceptable for as long as we live.
At the beginning of this interview, you talked about how there were two dimensions to this, the gun laws and the white supremacist ideology. Let's turn to the white supremacist ideology, if you could. Police are investigating this document, this screed filled with white nationalist and racist hatred towards Latinos and immigrants. They believe it to be written by the alleged terrorist in El Paso, Texas. Now, you said in response to the El Paso massacre, quote, America is under attack from homegrown white nationalist terrorism. You also referenced 9/11 inspiring your generation into action, and you called for similar action once again. Why do you think there is a reluctance in the Congress and in the FBI to label and investigate white supremacist terrorism, which is what we're seeing, in a way that there is no reluctance to condemn other forms of terrorism, Islamist or other kinds?
I think it's because our politicians are embarrassed. Certainly our White House is embarrassed. You know, there's a parallel between the failure to keep our elections safe from Russian interference, because acknowledging that that's a problem would be embarrassing to this president who benefited from it, and the fact that confronting white nationalist terrorism would be embarrassing to a president who helped stoke many of these feelings in this country to begin with. But it's time to turn the page. It's time to move on and actually do something. You know, this administration actually cut funding for Homeland Security programs on countering violent extremism, and has, as far as I can tell, not produced any kind of national strategy on far-right terrorism. After 9/11, we swore up and down we were going to be different. We said this was going to change us. Being attacked by terrorists was going to make us better than we were. What about this time? Is being attacked by terrorists now, homegrown white nationalist terrorists, going to make us better? Or are we going to allow those terrorists to make us worse and more divided? The choice is ours, but it requires leadership. And we are emphatically not getting that leadership from this White House or from congressional Republicans. Now, if the White House is beyond redemption, so be it. But congressional Republicans have a choice. Every member of Congress right now and the Senate in the Republican Party, I believe, knows better. At least some of them know better. And one of the reasons I think so many of them are leaving is because they don't have the heart to stay, but they don't have the courage to stand up to the current reality. If there was ever a time for that to change, it's now.
What is the current reality? Congressman Beto O'Rourke and Governor Jay Inslee have said that they think President Trump is a white nationalist. Do you?
Yeah, I mean, at best, he's condoning and encouraging white nationalism. Look, when you got people chanting Jews will not replace us in the streets of Charlottesville and somebody gets killed in an act of terror and the president sees very fine people there, we have a president who made his career politically on demonizing Mexicans, and now we're seeing reports that the shooter yesterday had his goal as killing as many Mexicans as possible. You don't have to use a lot of imagination to connect the dots here. It is very clear that this kind of hate is being legitimized from on high. And if that were not true, the president would be acting and speaking very, very differently than what he's doing right now.
One last question. The alleged shooter in El Paso could be facing the death penalty in Texas. And this seems like the kind of example of a case where, you know, you probably could get very strong support for somebody like this, a white nationalist, assuming he's found guilty in a court of law, a white nationalist, white supremacist, murdering innocent people because of their race or the color of their skin. But you don't support capital punishment. Would you oppose it in this case as well?
If you're against it, then you're against it. And of course, we can find cases of heinous situations. People perhaps who deserve to die. I've just never met anybody who deserves to kill.
All right, fair enough. Mayor Pete Buttigieg, thank you for joining us. Horrible day. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
2 horrific mass shootings in one awful weekend, dozens killed in Texas and Ohio. There's much more ahead in our breaking news coverage of 2 American massacres. Stay with us.
20 innocent people from El Paso have lost their lives, and more than 24 more are injured.
Clearly, the question has to be raised. Why does Dayton have to be the 250th mass shooting in America?
Unspeakable horror on one terrible weekend in America, just actually within 13 hours of each other. At least 29 killed after one gunman targets an El Paso, Texas Walmart, and another opens fire in an entertainment district in Toledo, Ohio. 2 deadly mass shootings in the span of about 13 hours. Our experts are with us to talk about this. And Governor McAuliffe, we've heard from some of the leading Democratic presidential candidates today. We're going to hear from Senators Cory Booker and Julian Castro later. It's clear your party wants to enact some further gun restrictions, whether it's closing the gun show loophole. But I don't know that it can get through the Senate. I don't know that Senator Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, will even allow a vote on it.
I don't think it will. That's why elections matter. That's why next year we need to win control of the United States Senate. If we had control of the Senate and the House, you know, as governor of Virginia, every year I put up dozens of gun bills, universal, closing the gun show loophole, getting rid of assault weapons. My Republican legislature killed it early in the morning, 6:30, no recorded vote. But, you know, how many times does this have to happen till people rise up? And you know what? I go back to the point. Elections matter. This is driven by the President of the United States of America. We've got to stop him and his hate speech. but we need common sense gun restrictions. 95% of Americans are for universal background checks. Look what you have to go through, to get on a plane, to get a driver's license. You ought to go through the same procedure to get one of these weapons.
Let's put a pin for 1 second on what you refer to as President Trump's hate speech. I want to get to the topic of white supremacy, but let's just talk right now about guns, and we'll talk about that other subject in a second. You're a gun owner.
I am a gun owner. I own 2 pistols.
Is there anything you think that could pass?
Well, I think there's a big difference between owning a pistol, as I do, a revolver, and owning a semi-automatic weapon that is meant to kill only people. I mean, these guns that are being used were not meant for hunting. They're not meant for target practice. They are meant to be used in war to kill people. And I think that even as a Republican, as somebody who supports the right of individuals to own guns, I do not think that individuals have the right to own automatic or semi-automatic weapons.
So, Senator Santorum, I know that you're a strong supporter of gun rights. I want you to take a look at some of these poll numbers when it comes to public support for gun safety measures. These are all from a Quinnipiac poll, or different Quinnipiac polls. One of them, universal background checks, 94% support. Another one, mandatory waiting period for gun purchases. This poll's from 2018, 83% support. And then a poll from this year, May, 77% support requiring individuals to obtain a license before being able to purchase a gun. That seems like a rather far-reaching measure that would be very tough to get through the Senate. But public sentiment is clearly with further restrictions on gun ownership, and the U.S. Senate is not.
Public sentiment's for it until you have a discussion about what the consequences are. And this is, everyone says, well, why doesn't this happen? It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens because there's actually a debate about it. There's actually, we look at the consequences of it. And what are the consequences of it? The consequences of it is that criminals and people who do bad things are not worried about gun laws that they're violating in order to get guns. But law-abiding people do. And what you see from a lot of these shootings that take place, several of them this year, which is law-abiding people actually come, not police, but other law-abiding people come and stop these things. Why? Because they have the right to own guns. And so taking that right away from law-abiding people, making it harder for law-abiding people to get guns, actually doesn't do anything to reduce the amount of crime and actually can make things worse.
Well, Texas is a concealed carry state, and that gunman, that horrible person, terrorist,
is not worried about violating gun laws if you're going to shoot.
But he wasn't worried about anybody packing heat in the Walmart in El Paso either, is my
point.
And
so they go to soft targets. That's exactly right. So the whole point is, when you restrict the amount of, when you restrict guns to law-abiding people, you make more soft targets.
What law-abiding person needs an AR-15 or an AK weapon? These are not weapons that are used for anything. They are used to kill people. They were invented for use in war, and their only targets are to kill people.
I want to bring in...
Jake, these people are bought and paid for by the NRA, so don't kid yourself. Let us not forget the power of the NRA in the Congress in these gerrymandered districts.
I want to let you respond to that, but I also don't want to lose sight on the fact, Mayor Rawlings Blake, former mayor of Baltimore, that actually, even though these mass shootings, understandably because they're so horrific and so overwhelmingly get attention from the media and the public, actually, in terms of homicide and gun deaths, it's the little girl in South Baltimore at 7 years old. It's the handguns, quite often, more than the semi-automatic weapons that are responsible for this. And it's the one-offs, often in urban America.
It's the one-offs, the two-offs. Many times in Baltimore and cities across the country, we're having 9 shootings in a weekend. And I never thought that I would say there's a point in which Senator Santorum and I agree. But today, the fact is that I think the polls are correct. People want something done. People want common sense reform, but there's a debate about how to get there. And we have to talk real about the path forward. We can't keep talking about the polls and saying what people stand for, what people want to have done, without people willing to have those critical conversations about how we get to better common sense gun reform. We know that we have to get there, but we need some legislators, we need people in Congress who have the courage to stand up to do something.
I just say I got to disagree, Mayor. We have had conversation long enough. We know how to get there. We know we need universal background checks in this country. We have debated this to death. I've debated it as a governor. enough. It is time for the talk to stop. It is time to take action.
With all due respect, the areas that have the strictest gun control have some of the highest crime rates. The idea that gun control is going to solve a problem is just not factually correct.
We're not saying gun control.
Work. There are
saving lives.
300 million guns in America. And what you're worried about is some transference of one to another. Again, with people who care not about whether they're breaking laws or not. You're politicizing it, and this is the most frustrating thing. There's people who are suffering right now, and we're talking about a proposal that will have no impact on this and it's all about
your party won't do anything.
But it proves my point. It proves my point. There's a debate about how we get there. It's clear that many Democrats feel that very strongly that there's a path forward. And it's also clear if you talk to Republicans off camera that many of them know that they have to do better with putting rules in place, putting laws in place to make America safer. We have to create a safe space for people to have that conversation without it being a litmus test for, whether you're going to lose your NRA card or whether you're not going to be a strong Democrat.
I want to bring you in, then I want to change the subject to the white supremacy.
Well, I just want to echo what Governor McAuliffe said. Donald Trump said he was going to stand up to the NRA after the Parkland shootings. And then the next day, because the NRA gives a lot of money to Republican Party candidates, reversed himself. The NRA is a corrupt organization. It is filled with people who are self-dealing. It is people who are enriching themselves. They are not representing law-abiding gun owners. They are representing a political motivation, and the NRA has to be taken on this subject.
Without taking issue with that, I just want to ask, as a former lawmaker, is the NRA's power, do you think, I mean, I understand a lot of people actually just philosophically agree with the NRA in the Senate, but do you think the NRA's power is more in their money or more in the fact that they're able to mobilize thousands of voters in states?
Look, they're powerful because it votes, because people who are out there who support what the NRA is talking about. The idea that this is about corruption or this is about money, it's about people who are passionate about making sure that we have a safe country and that we keep our liberties and our freedom.
We could talk about guns for the rest of the hour, but I do want to change the subject to something else that is clearly a part of the El Paso terrorist attack, which is white supremacy. I thought this was really interesting. A tweet and a statement from the Texas Land Commissioner, Republican George P. Bush, who wrote, "I proudly served in Afghanistan as a naval officer where our mission was to fight and kill terrorists. I believe fighting terrorism remains a national priority, and that should include standing firm against white terrorism here in the U.S." It's the first time I've ever heard the term white terrorism, but it actually fits perfectly because that's what we're seeing, an epidemic of it.
And that's exactly right. And by the way, El Paso was picked, I believe, by this man because it's an 85% Hispanic community. There is a lot of hatred out there. Every time I'm on television, I get hate mail that says for me to go back where I came from. And they don't mean Ireland, which is where the immigrants in my family came from. There is a sentiment now in which the President of the United States talks about infestation. He talks about an invasion repeatedly. He is fueling this hate. And I believe that he has a responsibility to stop it and to stop it now.
Governor McAuliffe, I want to go to you. You have a new book out called Beyond Charlottesville, Taking a Stand Against White Nationalism. We've heard from some of the presidential candidates today who say that President Trump's rhetoric against non-white Christian Americans, against immigrants, migrants, whomever, encourages violence. I mean, that's what Beto O'Rourke said starkly. Do you agree?
Absolutely. It is the president's rhetoric, his hate speech. You know, it's when he started his administration, banning those from those certain Muslim countries, ICE raids in certain areas. This has been a pattern. And then the worst was obviously Charlottesville, when we had neo-Nazis and white supremacists, neo-Nazis saying, Jews, you will not replace us. Look at what the manifesto had from the person in El Paso, ethnic replacement. And this guy cites, talk about Trump's white identity. David Duke in Charlottesville saying that Trump is bringing us back to a white America again. And then all the statements by the president over the last couple months. You know, Donald Trump came out as a full-fledged racist in Charlottesville. I was there. I heard what these people said. Donald Trump said they were fine people. Jake, they were not fine people. The neo-Nazis with their swastikas and Adolf Hitler T-shirts. the white supremacists screaming the most vile things I have ever heard about members of the African American as well as members of the Jewish faith. I've never heard anything like it. He incites this. He is culpable. Now, I don't blame the president for specific acts, but I do blame the president for the atmosphere that he has created in this country. Hatred and division.
And most recently, Mayor Rawlings, he's been attacking Baltimore. Now, some people say, look, he was just returning fire because Congressman Elijah Cummings heads the Oversight Committee, which subpoenaed documents from Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. But other people said that they found those attacks against Baltimore. No human being would want to live there, rodent and rat infested, et cetera. Racist, not even racially tinged, racist. What did you think?
I just think he's wrong for so many reasons. The fact that you're saying that he returned fire, I
said that that's what his supporters said. I didn't say it.
Well, Congressman Cummings is doing his job. The president should do his, which is to represent all of America. I wouldn't be mad if someone from Pittsburgh, we hate the Steelers. So if someone from Pittsburgh.
We hate the Ravens. So.
He's from Pittsburgh.
I'm from Pittsburgh.
But you get it, right?
I get it.
You get it. Like, I wouldn't be mad if someone from Pittsburgh said it, or, during football season, if someone from Boston said it. That's what you're supposed to do. But when you're the president, you're supposed to be the president of all of the what you consider the great parts and all the gritty parts, too. Imagine if something like what happened in Dayton happened in Baltimore. No one would want to see the president step foot there. That's not his role is to unite us, whether you like it or not. When you take that role, you're supposed to love every part of this country and defend it against everyone. What he's doing is wrong, and it's something wrong with him if he thinks that it's acceptable.
Senator?
I had 2 points. So number one, look, I agree that, and you've heard me say this over, that the president's rhetoric is over the top, and he needs to be more conscious of the fact that the rhetoric he uses can be twisted to paint a picture that is not a very complimentary picture for anybody. And he seems to just be oblivious to that. And here's a situation where they can take his rhetoric and they can say, look, I give the governor credit for not saying I'm not blaming him for this specific instance, which you can't and no one should. They will, but no one should. But the bottom line is he is creating the opportunity for people to twist it. The second thing is, listen to the rhetoric going back. That rhetoric is equally as racist and equally as difficult for the left to do the same thing, and no one's blaming them for the violence. So it goes both ways when it comes to the overhyped rhetoric.
But because there's no leftist manifesto that someone is leaving after a shooting.
Well, there is. I mean, look at the baseball shooting.
One shooting. That is one.
There's more than.
Everyone stick around. Another hour of State of the Union starts right now.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is in mourning. 29 people have been killed, dozens more injured in 2 mass shootings in the United States, separated by 13 hours and 1,600 miles. In Dayton, Ohio, today, a gunman opened fire early this morning in a popular nightlife district. 9 people, plus the suspected gunman, are dead. Here's what it sounded like from a car parked nearby.
Dude, what the What the
Just awful. Authorities believe there was only one gunman there, that he used an AK-47 style rifle and wore body armor of some sort. There's no word as of now on a possible motive. About 13 hours earlier in El Paso, Texas, a shooter gunned down 20 innocent people at a Walmart near the U.S.-Mexico border. The 21-year-old male suspect is in custody. Authorities are investigating a document posted online and believed to have been written by this suspected terrorist. The document is filled with white nationalist language and racist hatred, specifically towards immigrants and Latinos. Texas Governor Greg Abbott says that the incident is being investigated as a hate crime. No on-camera comments yet from the President of the United States, but he has been tweeting this morning from his golf club in Bedminster, New Jersey. The president saying that state, local, and federal authorities are working together. He also wrote, quote, "God bless the people of El Paso, Texas. God bless the people of Dayton, Ohio," unquote. The El Paso shooting stands now as the 8th deadliest single-day mass shooting in modern American history. 5 of the top 10 have occurred since 2016. Join me now from El Paso, Texas, is Mayor D. Margo. Mayor Margo, I want to start, of course, by offering our deepest condolences to your community and the city of El Paso. What is the latest you can tell us about the investigation and about the survivors?
Well, Jake, it's on.